Hi there. In this video we're going to talk about some best practices, specifically how to determine and measure policy and process maturity for your supply management function. And also at the end of this there's a free toolkit for you to take away, or policy calculator if you will, that will be linked within the comments below for you to be able to download and use with measuring your specific processes, not just listening to me do the example that's in this presentation. We're talking about process maturity and policy maturity, but why bother? First off, efficiency. So by documenting and improving the quality of processes, you're going to make the efficiency of it much higher to make sure that it's carried out in that most efficient and effective way. By doing so, you're also going to increase the quality. Documenting each step, you're going to set the bar as to what good looks like, and that quality will increase over time. You're going to decrease the cost of running it when people become more familiar with it and the tools that you provide around it, documents, checklists, etc. You're going to save money every time it's run, almost commoditizing the process. Time, you're going to save the development time to start with because you're going to have a standardized and systematic way of breaking down processes into clear chunks and then rebuilding them up using the framework we're about to go through. You're also going to be able to spot and eliminate flaws a lot easier. So document the process allows you to locate flaws or pieces of the process, the parent and child, so the child elements, the steps that might not make sense, that might not hand over in a decent way to a secondary team or an alternative team. You're going to have a single point of reference, so clear in terms of where someone should go to get help on said process. And you're also going to be able to eliminate any doubt, and you can have a single point of the truth, which helps with all the previously mentioned stages. So efficiency and quality, etc. will always be helped with having a single reference point. And also you're going to ensure compliance. So very key for those of you that are in more regulated industries. Most industries are becoming more regulated, but there are still some that are more regulated than others. By running through a documented process that is designed to ensure that you comply, by the nature of how it's put together, you're going to make sure that your chance of being able to prove that you're compliant will increase greatly. So they're the reasons of why you should be looking at measuring your policy and your process maturity. So a bit around the scale that we use to do that, and we go through this with our customers and our prospects in equal measure, and we look at something that's a 5-step model, and it's akin to CMI models, so capability and maturity indexes. I've used a lot in my past career, so we've just aligned it to that because it's quite a familiar one for people to understand. So step 1 on this is initial. You've got no concept or policy processed, but you do have a desire to change to get on the ladder that you can see in front of you. Desire to change, recognise its influence either internally, need to change, or by external factors such as the regulator or stakeholders asking you to. You then get to stage 2, which is a managed policy. So the policy and process is designed in its basic elements are agreed, and the process is documented in a basic way. To get to stage 3, you want to have a desire to get better, faster, more commoditized, and understand the performance of the process that's being run. Which leads you to step 3 or stage 3. It's a defined process, so repeatable performance is achieved and KPIs are defined against that process to indicate whether it's healthy or not and whether it's running right or not. Also to the standard documents, you've got things like checklists and templates that are being provided in equal measure. To get to the next level, you've got to have a desire to introduce some kind of external governance or oversight or quality control. So you then get to stage 4, which is qualitatively managed. You've got some key risk indicators introduced. So what are the risks with the said process and how do you spot them? The controls are established to ensure that the process itself is remaining healthy and of high quality. There's also scheduled oversight that's agreed. So an external party or body coming in to spot check the quality of the process, sampling a subset of the times it's been run over a set period and seeing whether they meet the spirit of the document, so both qualitative and quantitative. The next stage to get to level 5 is a desire to need and scale exponentially, so via robotics and AI. So it takes a very strong, very mature process, but is largely manual, and then starts to look at with artificial and augmented intelligence, where that can be accelerated, automated, and then just managed on an exception basis. So that's the scale point, right? If you have a process that's largely automated and it only just asks for human intervention when it gets to an exception point, you can scale that exponentially. And those are the 5 steps that lead you up to this 10-point maturity ladder that you can see here. A slight different view, but sort of different level of detail around what's involved in each of those different steps. So you wouldn't be surprised the initial one was nothing. Stage 2, or the process design, sort of a managed minimum as we've got it here, that you understand what the policy group is. So it's part of onboarding, what the policy element or the policy title might look like. You've got a description of the policy and the process. You know who and how you are targeting the process. So segment, how you're targeting groups. Maybe everyone might be doing specific demographics. It's a one-off or or there's a level of frequency associated with it, which leads you to sort of run saying how many times per annum is it run, time per instance, so what's the touch time versus the elapsed time, so how long does it take to run on average the entire process, out of that entire length of time it takes to run, what's the touch time. So for example, you might be a 4-week elapsed process, but it might be 8-10 hours touch time when you actually look at it in work. It's done in stages. Who's accountable for the process? Who is the process owner, as it were? Who's responsible for driving out the process and actually delivering it? And is it documented? Those bullets will get you to that end of the minimum managed standard as defined on the previous slide. Next bit is repeatable performance defined. So do you know the inputs required for this process? So what do you need to know to run the process? What are the expected outputs and the quality of those outputs? What are the key performance indicators against the process? You provide an estimation of a time to complete and an estimation and effort of days. There is a checklist available so someone can run through and check that they've covered all the salient parts at the end of the process to confirm that it was adhered to in the spirit of the design. And you provide an example. By providing an example, you get the minimum standard bar is elevated because there's something for someone to replicate and use as the basis for the quality of which the process is deployed and completed in. Point 4, back to the thing I said about oversight and risk, quantitative managed. Oversight's agreed, I mentioned that before. Do we understand the cost per cycle of oversight? So how much cost is it to run a process? So back to the elapsed time versus touch time. Who are the people involved? Have a concept of a blended rate per hour for those people. And what's the cost per cycle? Meaning that you can then look to improve that over time. What's the risk of not completing? So what happens if this isn't completed either at all or in a poor manner? What are the key risk indicators wrapped around the process? So what's a leading or a lagging indicator? Leading being something that will trigger prior to something going wrong. Lagging has gone wrong and you're retrospectively looking at it from a metrics perspective. And what controls do you apply and what do you monitor to make sure the health of that process is as optimum as it can be? So if the controls aren't breached, you expect that to be a healthy process. Sometimes you have a process that's broke down, but a control wasn't triggered. It means the coverage of your controls is got a gap, right? So you need to go back to the drawing board, look at why it broke down, why the process was flawed, and what controls didn't trigger that, and then put suitable additional controls in place to make sure it is there in future. And then ultimately, are the controls applied and monitored and the quality checked, as I was just referring to. So that's the largely manual part of it that's going to get you to a decent sort of 80 percentile level of maturity. The final bit is about robotics and automation and scale, as I've already said. How much of the workflow is automated? How much of robotic process automation is there? How much of machine learning is there? So a situation has been conducted a number of times and the outcome was the same every time. How much can you then put that into machine learning for the machine to repeat that on your behalf in the future, given the symptoms or the scenarios that it saw in the process before that happened? And how much is there use of sort of augmented or artificial intelligence to enrich the process and automate it even more without human intervention? So that's just a different way of looking at the same 5-step maturity model we went through. This is the policy builder that you'll be able to download and make use of as a toolkit. It's got all those stages I just ran through. Very simple method of completing it. If you have a understanding or these things in place, make a comment in each box. If you don't have any kind of idea or there's nothing, then leave it blank. And ultimately what you'll get calculated with is a policy score, and it will give you a score of what's in place, not in place, and you'll see against the per policy stroke process where you are from an initial stage to managed to defined to qualitatively managed to optimized. And you'll be able to report across however many processes you run. Do this exercise once for each process and you will end up with a coverage and a defined stage or an average as to how mature all your policies and processes are. Where they're not 100% everywhere, and it's highly doubtful that they would be, at least you then have a known and defined clear path to improve that process over time that you can commit as part of your strategic intent. Like I said, this is a toolkit episode, so there's one available for you in the comments, in the sections below. Please download it. As always, feedback is appreciated. Make your comments and we'd love to read them. Thank you.
To keep up with the latest Brooklyn vendor assurance news, subscribe here and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Links in the description below.